Hi my loves, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my August books for you, which I'm really excited about. There are a lot of good books in here. Before we begin, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Surfshark. So I've got a massive pile of books here and I want to show them to you so I can get them off my lap. As you can see, we're in a different location today. We have a guest staying in the bedroom upstairs. So no bookish background today. Hopefully you are enjoying the variety with this lovely cloud wallpaper. And not missing the books too much. Let me show you this huge pile. So here we go, my loves. This does not include everything as well. There are some secret books that I read on an e-reader, but this is the majority of books, and I read some seriously good books in August. It was a fantastic reading month. Cheating a little bit because I did finish a couple of them in September, but I want to talk to you about them before I forget about them. And they feel like summer reads to me. This is the last of my summer reads. Let's start with our book club pick, which was In Ascension by Martin MacInnes. So I read this back in June when I was writing an article about summer reads, funnily enough. And now I have read it for a second time for book club in a little bit more detail. Then had two wonderful conversations about it, which deepened my love for this book even more. And I have to say, on a second read, I really loved it even more. The first time round, I really liked it. I knew I really liked it. It's exactly the kind of thing that I love. It's literary sci-fi, but it does have a slightly confusing ending, I would say. I knew when I first read it that it wasn't a universal success for book club, but the majority of us, I think I can say, really liked this. And actually many of us felt that it really resonated with us and we connected to it kind of emotionally. But I knew when I read it back in June and I knew we were going to do it for book club, I was like, this ending is going to annoy some folks. This is not your typical sci-fi in that it's not giving you loads of answers. This is a book about questions, not answers. It's also really a book about what it means to be human. I don't want to speak too much about the plot because I feel like following the protagonist's journey is part of the wonder of this book, because you're going from the depths of the ocean up into the stars. We follow microbiologist Lee. She's interested in the origins of life. And we follow her career trajectory, I suppose, but also her life. She had a difficult childhood growing up in the Netherlands, and she has difficulty with her family, with her social connections, and really immerses herself in her work. There's quite a lot of science packed in here, but not too much that it's overload. And it's beautifully written. The prose is gorgeous. I've spoken a few times now about how I feel like this book has an undertow to it. It really draws you in almost, well, inexorably, without you even noticing almost. You're kind of pulled into Lee's perspective. Her voice is quite, it's quite subdued and sort of underwatery. She spent a lot of time in water, and obviously first life originated in water, so she has a fascination with it as well. So yeah, it's kind of subdued, but it's quite magnetic. There's something, as I say, it kind of has that feeling of an undertow. It draws you in. If you connect with it, you really connect with it, I think. It's not one of those books which is perfectly concise, precisely written, but something about its imperfections draw me to it again. I feel kind of connected to it. It feels personal somehow, this book. It feels like it does tap into something of what it means to be alive, what it means to be basically a miracle as a human being who's able to think about the universe, essentially the universe thinking about itself. Some of that wonder is encapsulated in this book, and I really liked it. I'm so glad many of our book clubbers liked it as well. For our Patreon cinema club as well, we watch a lot of films together, and we watched a couple of films which I think worked really well with this book. Not necessarily exactly the same, but it really deepened and broadened my feelings about this book and this kind of genre of interstellar travel and what it means to do that and also be a human with a family and a certain lifespan, etc, etc. We watched High Life, directed by Claire Denis, and Interstellar by Christopher Nolan, of course. So yeah, all three of them kind of merged in my mind in a great way. And speaking of Cinema Club, I think it is a wonderful time to introduce today's sponsor, which is Surfshark VPN. With a VPN, you can change your virtual location, which is helpful for a variety of things. Not least, you can access streaming services libraries from across the world. So useful for me, who, as I say, is watching lots of films with the Patreon Cinema Club. Gives me access to so much more content, which is incredible. Also, when we've been traveling before, I haven't been able to access, for example, the government website. If I'm sorting out my tax or something like that, a VPN is really helpful there. If you do travel a lot, a VPN is a must, I think. Also because it keeps your data safe. So if you're using a lot of public Wi-Fi, Surfshark VPN is going to encrypt your data and keep it safe from would-be cyber criminals. You're not going to get those creepy personalized ads which seem to pop up. You know, you click on one thing and then you're seeing advertising for it on literally every website that you go on. A VPN is going to protect you from all of that sort of thing. Yes, I will leave a link down below so you can sign up. If you use the code SunbeamsJess, you can get an extra 3 months free, which is amazing. So thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. And now let's move on to the next book. Next up we have The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. I love this book. Love, love, love this book. I read Close Range, which is a selection of her short stories, including Brokeback Mountain, not too long ago, and I really liked them. There is no doubting that Proulx is a powerhouse. But yes, I liked this one even more. This is a novel, and yeah, this was just a huge success for me. Definitely going on the favorites, all-time favorites list as well. But it crept up on me, this one. I didn't expect to feel that way at the beginning of the book, which means, again, I really want to just dive straight back in and reread this one, and if I had the time, I would. It'd make a nice wintry novel, this one. But anyway, let me tell you about it first. So it's about Coil. He is one of life's losers, okay? There's no better way to put it. The man is a little bit pathetic. By a little bit, I mean a lot. He marries this blatantly awful woman and she's monstrous to him, and then she dies and leaves him with 2 young daughters to take care of, and he decides to go back to his ancestral homeland of Newfoundland, having grown up in, I think it's the New Jersey area. And he moves back with his daughters and also with his elderly aunt, who is just sort of only just got in contact with, basically. And there he makes a new life for himself. So Proulx has this very kind of choppy, almost awkward style at the beginning, and it is sometimes challenging to read. I know that when I talked about Close Range, I talked a little bit about how the sentence structure there was a little bit complex as well. Not bad, certainly not bad, but just requires a little more of the reader. That one I think is even probably slightly more challenging to read because it also has a lot of ranching terms, local Wyoming terminology and dialect. So the actual diction there is also difficult. This one less so, but yeah, just the syntactical structure is a little difficult, especially at the beginning. I found it to be much less challenging as I moved probably past that 50-page mark and into the book. And I think it's twofold. One, you kind of get into the rhythm of it, a little bit like when you go into Wolf Hall, for example, you need to it takes a minute to get your bearings with it. But also I think Proulx actually does make it easier to read as you go on, as Coil settles into his new life in Newfoundland. And it's funny, it's not like Stone, because when you hear the description of this book, kind of quiet, reflective, redemptive story of a man, I was expecting it to maybe be a little bit like Stoner, John Williams' Stoner, but it's not like that at all. It's actually quite different. We don't even fully focus on Coil or his internal feelings that much. In fact, we move through a number of characters' stories from the place where they decide to settle, which is Killiecraw, which is where Coil's family is originally from. And yet, through his interaction with his environment, you know, he starts off very scared of boats and water, and this is like a rocky, watery, dangerous territory. You need to be familiar with a boat to live on Newfoundland. But in his sort of relationship to this environment, you begin to see his transformation in just tiny little moments. It's really, really masterfully done. And as I say, the storytelling here is impeccable. There's lots of mini stories within the larger story. And the imagery is just very striking. There are some really striking moments which I will not forget. I just felt so immersed in it by the end, and I felt sad to be leaving these characters at the end. There's loads packed in here. You could easily write a thesis on this one, and yet also it's enjoyable and kind of warm by the end of it. So overall, really, really love this one. Highly recommend. Don't think it will be for literally everyone because of that kind of style, as I mentioned, but I really loved it. Would check the content warnings on that one though. if you have any concerns. In my blog post, I mention it a little bit more. Let's talk about another VanderMeer. Let's talk about Veniss Underground. This was his debut novel. Don't know why, but I didn't expect to love this. And yet I loved it. I think it might be one of my favourite VanderMeers. I mean, there's quite a few favourite VanderMeers, but this has joined my top tier ranking of VanderMeers. Again, I found myself quite moved by this one, but it's very weird. So it's set in a place called Veniss. It's like this super future. At times it reminded me of like cyberpunk novels, city, very dystopian, and you can see all of VanderMeer's themes that he later really expands on in like little seeds in this novel. It's really, really interesting. If you're an existing fan of VanderMeer, I think it's really, really worth reading this one particularly. If you love ambergris, if you love Area X, all the kind of seeds are in this book. And we follow three characters. We follow three characters' perspectives. So we start with Nicholas. He is a self-proclaimed slang jockey, and it's a lot of slang, it's a lot of jargon. Again, it immediately put me in mind of like Neuromancer. It's different because VanderMeer is a lot more connected to kind of biology and body and gore than William Gibson, and I didn't like Neuromancer that much, but definitely has that kind of cyberpunk type edge to it. It's only a few pages, that section, because when I opened it I was like, oh my goodness, is it all going to be like this? Because it's not super easy to read. But then we move almost immediately into his sister's perspective, because Nicholas goes missing. He wants to go buy a meerkat from this man named Guin, or this being named Guin, who is a bioengineer amongst many other things, crime lord, and he also is this power in Venice. He's becoming this sort of underworld power that seems to be infiltrating everybody's lives. Everybody has a meerkat to help them do their laundry and stuff. You can see we're getting into weird VanderMeer territory here. It's really not the weirdest thing in this book. We then get into Nicola's perspective. We have a little bit of her searching for Nicholas because, as I say, he goes missing. And then we get into a man named Sheldrake's perspective. He is from Veniss Underground and he had a relationship with Nicola. Now he lives above ground, but he must now go back underground to search for Nicola, whom he still loves, even though they are no longer together. And sort of Nicola's by the by. And what ensues is a very epic journey. It's definitely inspired by Greek mythology. Luckily for me, who, as we know, has got a bit of an aversion to it, it's not like super obvious, but it's there in like tone. It feels mythic, it feels epic. And certainly the kind of way that the story moves also feels similar to mythology. Sheldrake encounters various different odd creatures and different trials almost. And he has this sort of ragged determination to find Nicola, whether or not she still loves him. It is, as I say, I found myself quite moved by the end of it. Whereas in A Peculiar Peril, which is not my favourite VanderMeer, because I feel like there's a lot of similarities between the two actually. With A Peculiar Peril, it seems like really chaotic to a point where it kind of alienated me a little bit. This one I felt was very compelling, like it really moved well. So even though it was really, really weird, there's a lot of gore in here, so be warned if you don't like gory stuff. It felt compulsive to read still. It didn't feel so chaotic that I couldn't get to grips with it. In this edition, which is a newly republished American edition, by the way, the British one is different. I don't know if it has all of the, I actually own the British one, so I should just go and check, shouldn't I? But it has a great afterword in this. It also has a short story, which I was less convinced on the short story, but the afterword in this is really, really good. It like starts with a fragment of a prequel story, and then VanderMeer talks a little bit about how the novel came to be and how it almost didn't come to be, and there are lots of fragments of stories like the one in the afterword that contribute sort of to the mythology of Veniss Underground but couldn't be completed in and of themselves. I thought it was just a really interesting look into the kind of writer's process and what it means to write a story as odd as this one. But I like to quote this. I talked about this novel a few times on like Patreon and stuff. I like to quote what VanderMeer himself says about this book because I find it quite true to how I feel about it. Veniss Underground is an unabashedly decadent, phantasmagorical novel, fed by fragments the reader cannot see but can sense, by visions and transformations, by cross-pollination with other story cycles. It is a mutt, a mongrel, but to me, oddly beautiful nonetheless. I do find this one oddly beautiful. So yes, highly recommend Veniss Underground. It's not going to be for everyone. VanderMeer at his weirdest is most definitely an acquired taste, but I really liked it. Okay, into If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. We read this one for Books on Film, so I also watched the Barry Jenkins film that came out a few years ago, and I feel like my thoughts about the two are kind of melded together. But I actually watched the film first as well, and then I read the book. So this is about Tish. She's 19 and she's pregnant with her boyfriend's baby, but he has been falsely accused of rape, and Tish and her family are desperately trying to get him exonerated. So obviously this book is tackling the American justice system and its racist treatment of African Americans. Unfortunately, extremely relevant still to this day, and you can see why Jenkins would have picked this book to adapt because of its relevance still. So there's a kind of tension going on in this book between the love story between Tish and Fonny, which is kind of beautifully written and wrought, and this absolutely heart-wrenching situation and the kind of political context around that. It's not like overt, but it's most certainly there, obviously just in the storyline itself. Baldwin is always worth reading. I will read all of Baldwin's books. There's something about his work, his sentences, which are just stunning. This one has a particularly incredible final few lines. The ending is a little controversial, especially of the book. Jenkins changes it slightly in the film. But you just can't beat Baldwin at a sentence level. Incredible. However, I couldn't help comparing my experience with this book compared to Giovanni's Room or Go Tell It on the Mountain. There is something slightly missing from this one that is there in those other two books. I don't know if it's because the other two books are drawn a little bit more from Baldwin's own life and his own experiences, and so this one falters slightly from that disjunct. I just didn't quite feel it felt super real or authentic in the ways that those books really do. So it's not my favourite Baldwin. I don't think it's him at his absolute best, but as I say, it's worth reading all Baldwin, any Baldwin at any time. And it's nice to see him exploring this love story and the warmth and support that most of the Black community gives Tish and Fonny. I thought was really lovely to see portrayed in this book, and I think would have been quite unusual at the time of its publication as well. So as always, I recommend this one. So some Le Guin. And this is the Annals of the Western Shore trilogy. These Library of America hardbacks, they're like the only hardbacks that I really just like to hold. I don't know what it is about them, but I always find myself kind of wanting to hold them. Anyway, so I listened to Gifts, the first book. I read Voices in here, and I'm currently listening to Powers, so I haven't quite finished it. But I am quite close to the end of Powers, so I do feel like I can speak with some authority on this trilogy as a whole. Now, these are wonderful. Le Guin's fantasy is my favourite of her stuff, really. Earthsea I adore, and this I now adore. I love her science fiction, but fantasy is where it's at for me. These are classed as young adult, and I actually think there's going to be an interesting, I think it might be a talk that she gave about young adult fiction, which I'm going to read when I finished Powers, at the back of this copy. There are just, I can think of countless examples of adult fiction which does not even begin to measure up to the complexity that Le Guin puts in here. Her prose is always beautiful, pared back, but so effective. I would not be put off by the young adult label, because you know I don't really read a lot of young adult fiction, or particularly like a lot of contemporary young adult fiction. This is worth reading, as is Earthsea, which I think is the same. Interesting, isn't it, how the fantasy gets put in the young adult section and the sci-fi not. Anyway, These are dark too. There's some dark moments in these books, which all good young adult fiction should be. Truly dark, you know, because kids and young adults are facing dark things as well. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. They are kind of separate stories, these, with separate protagonists, but they do of course interlink, and they're all obviously set on the Western Shore. So the first one is about a couple of young adults called Guin and Proulx, who live in this forbidding uplands. It's pretty poverty stricken, and it's a pretty unnerving place to be because the uplands is known for its witchcraft, and each of the families there, the kind of ruling families I suppose, they all have little, like, not fiefdoms, but kind of like fiefdoms. They each have a gift, and the gift is not really a gift. It's a clever choice of words from Le Guin. So Guin can call animals to her, which sounds lovely, but they often use it to call animals to the hunt to be killed. And Proulx's family can destroy with a look and a gesture, like destroy people, destroy all living things. Basically, it's about these two teens coming to terms with that, and whether they want to use their gifts and how they want to use their gifts and what their gifts truly are. And it's wonderful. Something about it, again, I connected to instantly. I just really loved. I think I had a good narrator on this one as well. Like I said, I listened to that one, and I would like to return to it and read it as well. But yeah, just so atmospheric. It's the kind of rural setting I think that Le Guin writes amazingly well as well. So yeah, that's Gifts. And then Voices is quite different. It's about Mima or Mema. She lives in a city which has been conquered by a neighbouring culture. And that culture is very anti-literate, anti-books, anti-written word, whereas her culture was very kind of learned. And it's really about her trying to kind of protect and sustain the literacy in her besieged city. But it's got lots of wonderful moments, lots of nice interlinking with the first book. So definitely read them in order. I wouldn't say they're like total standalones. You could read them as standalones, but I would say read them in order. And then I'm on to Powers now, which I'm listening to again, which is about a slave, Gavir, and his sort of movement towards freedom. And as always with Le Guin, she is so good at looking at the way power functions, the nuances, the grey areas, the difficulties. She's looking at the power of storytelling, how vital it is to human culture. And she also writes relationships really well, I find, with Le Guin. She writes friendship and love really, really well. So yes, fantastic. I feel like I didn't know much about these books at all, and thus I am going to call them forgotten gems. I really, really recommend them, especially if you liked Earthsea and you're sort of looking for something similar. You must read these. I read the final book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb, Assassin's Quest. Need I wax lyrical about Robin Hobb again? I love her. I highly recommend her if you're looking for some well-written fantasy. Again, it's clever as well as being just absorbing. It's psychologically real. You know, you're going to feel connected to the characters. I think her character work is excellent, really, really excellent. I'm not going to talk too much about the plot of this one, obviously, lest I ruin the first two books for you if you haven't read them. Again, I really have enjoyed starting with the Farseer trilogy. I've heard amazing things about the live ship traders, which I'm really, really excited about getting to. I think I will do that next year, but I'm glad I started with Fitz. And yes, this one broke my heart a little bit. A lot of it. What people say about this one is true. It is a little bit overlong, it's a little bit repetitive, it's a little bit too slow, just a touch too slow. But I'm willing to forgive Hobb basically anything because she's just introduced this childlike wonder back into my life with this fantasy series. I just love reading them, just really, really enjoyable. I feel like a kid again, but in an adult grown-up way. Read some Robin Hobb, please. Before I forget, let's talk about some books that I don't have physically. I listened to Unexpected Stories by Octavia Butler, which is just a couple of, at the time, previously unpublished Butler stories. I think these are for the existing Butler fan. I wouldn't start here. I want to read the rest of Butler's work possibly like next year. I don't think I'm far off, to be honest. I've read a lot of Butler and I love her. And very much like Le Guin, though they are quite different kind of stylistically, she's just really good at getting into the nuances of power, of race, of gender. She just really understands it deeply and uses these themes very successfully in her work and in her world building. She always surprises me with her imagination and she's just wonderful. So yeah, I liked both of these stories a lot. I would recommend them. I think it's easiest to actually listen to them, like that's the easiest way to get hold of them. And I enjoyed listening to them. They're narrated by Robin Miles, who did all of the Broken Earth trilogy, which I recently listened to, re-listened to, and yes, I recommend for the existing Butler fan. It's not long at all, it's like a couple of hours of listening. And I also read, as part of our reference section non-fiction book club that we do every 2 months, so we have kind of 2 months to read the book, Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake. First of all, what an author name to be writing a book about fungi, fantastic. But this is a great read, really, really good. Just talking about everything we do know about the alien creatures that are fungi. I mean, they just act and move in ways that are so alien to us as human beings. That is fascinating in and of itself, and obviously everything that we don't know about fungi and the way that this life form disturbs the human urge to categorize everything and to cut the individual off from their ecosystem, and the way that studying fungi necessarily makes you question a lot of that. And for that reason, it works really, really nicely, for example, with Braiding Sweetgrass, which I read by Robin Wall Kimmerer earlier this year. Again, they're quite different books, but they just tie nicely together because both authors, through their subjects, are looking at the limits of the scientific process and the scientific way of accruing knowledge in this sort of very apparently objective style, and the subjectivity of all of existence knowledge and the way that human beings interact with our apparently scientific objects. So both authors are really interrogating that idea through their subjects. And I think Sheldrake actually directly quotes Kimmerer a couple of times. But yeah, I also have a lot of great fungi facts now, which is fantastic. So yes, I really, really recommend it. It's just the type of non-fiction that I love these days, just about natural world, giving me lots of really interesting, thought-provoking information about the world we live in and how little we know about it. I read Paul Beatty's Joker Joker Deuce, a poetry collection. He was a poet before he was a novelist. I think both of his collections of poetry that he published were written before all of his novels, I think. This is just pure Beatty. It just reads, I just think that man must have come out of the womb writing like this. It's incredible. It's so complex, interesting, wonderful, wonderful poetry. If you can get your hands on it, I really recommend it. I think they should republish this, but I don't think it's super easy to get your hands on it. But yeah, it has all the hallmarks of Beatty, really interesting themes and engagement with African American culture. It's very musical and rhythmic, much like his novels are. There's a lot of kind of like pop culture stuff in here. It's satirical, biting. It's just very, very Beatty. If you've read Beatty's novels, these will feel very distinctive to you. And yeah, I really recommend for any existing Beatty fans, a wonderful, wonderful collection of poetry. He's a master. Okay, next up we have At the Mouth of the River of Bees. I'm always like, am I putting an extra "the" in there? No. At the Mouth of the River of Bees by Keege Johnson. Not sure if I'm saying her name right. This is a collection of stories, and it takes stories from like 20 years of Johnson's career. So as one might suspect, some are really good, some are less good. There are some really, really good stories in here. I love 26 Monkeys, also The Abyss. I think that is a nigh on perfect short story, and I really recommend it. If you can see it anywhere, if you can Google it. I also really liked Names for Water, The Horse Raiders, At the Mouth of the River of Bees, and also The Man Who Bridged the Mist. And the final one I also liked, The Evolution of Trickster Stories among the dogs of North Park after the change. These are speculative stories for the most part, I think completely. And there are some really interesting, unique ideas in here. But yeah, some of the stories are just less successful. She writes about animals and human relationships with animals beautifully. I love when authors include animals in their work. So a lot of the animal stories were a big success. She does have a few stories in here based on Japanese culture and mythology. I don't think it would go down as well if it were published today. She's a white author. I know that it doesn't kind of sit right with a few readers. She's got a new collection out. I assume she will have changed this in her new collection, but it's something to know about this collection. But in general, it's well worth reading this one just for those incredible stories. I've also got O Pioneers by Willa Cather. Am I saying that right? Cather, which again I really liked. It was published in 1913. It's about Alexandra Bergson, a Swedish-American woman who inherits the family farm from her father, and she sort of succeeds where he didn't succeed in making the land fertile and rich, and essentially becoming rich herself as a farmer. So she's a successful farmer, and obviously in that respect it's an unusual novel to have this woman farmer as our protagonist. But there is also another storyline here which is about her brother and his love for a local woman, which I wasn't really expecting given the blurb that I read. I thought it was just going to be about Alexandra, and it's not. So yeah, that was a bit of a surprise, and it's quite melodramatic, the love storyline, I have to say. The prose is very kind of light and deft, and it's obviously a slim novel, but it really creates the world nicely. It's atmospheric, and you get a sense of the feast and famine of farm life and the difficulties of farming really well. Can I love this book, seeing as it's a romanticisation of pioneer life? Not entirely. You know, the opening description of Nebraska as this hard place to live, which is completely infertile and nobody can make a success of it type of thing, I'm sure was not the experience of the indigenous peoples that lived there before the likes of the Bergsons. Not to mention the sheer destruction that has ensued from this type of farming over much of the earth. So I don't really feel the success of Alexandra in the same way, having that context in my mind. I can appreciate it for what it is, you know. So our final book today, the least successful book of the month, unfortunately, is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I expect too much of Kuang. I think that's just what it is. Whether that's because of her educational background, which is extremely impressive, or because she's just like uber popular and everybody loves her work. Well, seemingly everybody loves her work. I just expect too much of her, I think. Especially they did slap the literary label on this one, and I'm not sure I'm willing to give it the literary label. I'm willing to give it the thriller label. I'm not really willing to give it the literary label just because it isn't her usual fantasy. I don't think it necessarily went all the way to literary. Yeah, but as a thriller, this works. It satirises the publishing industry in a kind of amusing way. It's about a woman called June Haywood. She witnesses the death of her friend Athena Liu, who is a Chinese-American author who has experienced a lot more success than June, and June is pretty bitter about it, very bitter about it, feels very jealous of Athena. But yeah, June witnesses Athena's death, and in the aftermath picks up Athena's basically finished manuscript of her latest novel and ends up passing it off as her own. And obviously we're going to follow June's downward spiral. She definitely has a compulsive voice, like you kind of are drawn into it and you keep reading. I actually listened to this one, but is full of bad energy because June is the worst. She is full of vitriol, she's racist. We don't like June, okay? You're not supposed to like June. Maybe you're not even supposed to like Athena, but whatever, you're definitely not supposed to like June. There are some interesting critiques of publishing in this novel. It does satirise it in an amusing way at times, But putting anything into the mouth of June is not particularly successful if you really want to critique something, because she's just this blatantly awful person. In general, nothing is examined in much depth with much nuance. The buzzwords are all there, certainly, but like, I guess it's satire, so that might be the argument why it's like not super nuanced. But when I think of Proulx Beatty's satire, even though he rejects the term satire, but it's satirical, I would say, the comparison is just, it's not good. I enjoyed listening to it for the most part. I thought the ending was not amazing. Didn't love how it was wrapped up. But yes, I expect too much of her. I don't always get what I'm expecting. I need to expect less, but also I just think Kuang's work maybe is not for me. I think she's talented from a technical kind of prose perspective, but just I always have problems with her themes or her plot or pacing or whatever it is, or the kind of didacticism of her work without the nuance. Yeah, I just don't think she's for me, and that's okay. I don't think I'll pick up her next book. But yes, my loves, that is all my August books. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'm very excited already about what I'm reading for September. Can't wait to talk to you about it. And again, thank you to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Don't forget about my link down below and my code, SunbeamsJess, to give you an extra 3 months free if you sign up. So yes, I will see you all again very soon. Bye.